Welcome back for another episode of the Peacemakers Podcast. I am your host, Lindsay Hager. I want to start off with a huge thank you to all of you for your messages and for your reviews for the podcast. This past year and a half of creating these episodes for you and getting to know you more through our Facebook group have been so incredibly fun and rewarding for me. You've probably noticed a recent update to the Facebook group name. It was formerly Enneagram 9 Stories, and now we're called the Peacemakers Community. In addition to that, my Instagram handle was previously Enneagram 9 Stories and is now lindsayhager.co. I'm making a few updates in preparation for season 2 of this podcast, and I'm just so excited for things coming up in this community. If you aren't subscribed to this podcast, don't forget to follow and subscribe. And make sure you're signed up for my email list, and I'll link this down in the show notes for you guys if you're not already subscribed. I don't want you to miss out on everything we have coming up, including my 4-week self-discovery workshop. Okay, so I'm going to go from zero to deep here, okay? So bear with me. My question is, do you ever have those moments where you feel connected to something larger than yourself? Something of a divine nature, maybe that seems to be calling you. It may be something ordinary, like taking a walk or having a conversation with a friend. Or for me, it often happens when I have my windows down in my car and I'm driving on a beautiful day, listening to Sarah Bareilles, connecting with the lyrics, and just feeling loved. And somehow I'm feeling something bigger than myself. Something divine is calling my name, meeting me there in the unexpected daily moments. What about during those more difficult experiences we go through in life? The intensity of walking through hardships with family members, or the loss of a job, or a conversation with someone that leaves you feeling unseen, hurt, or angry. And right there in those moments, alongside the suffering, we can also feel something of the divine meeting us there, something bigger than us. Maybe in those difficult times, you don't notice it right away, but in the following days of that hardship, you're inspired to have conversations. You seek out advice from others, or even just take a different route home from work that day. And suddenly you find yourself being met with this divine thing I'm describing. I remember in college during my freshman year, my parents divorced. It was out of nowhere for me, and I felt really lonely. That day my mom told me the marriage was ending. I went back to my dorm room, tried to find people to call. No one was available. And I had to sit in my thoughts and my sadness. It wasn't until later that day or the next day that I was even able to process my initial shock with someone else. But in the suffering, over those next few days and weeks, I found comfort and compassion amidst the uncertainty. It was like love piercing through the pain, coming to find me. There's something interesting to note here, though, especially for those of us that tend to avoid pain and vulnerability at all cost. You know what I'm talking about. Those of us that like to play it safe and stick to the routines. We love to maintain our peaceful inner sanctum. And so often we aren't allowing ourselves even to be in the vicinity of deep love or suffering. For the type 9, the word indolence is often used, which means avoiding exertion and engagement in life. Sure, our schedules may be full of busyness, but are we truly allowing ourselves to be engaged in life and affected by it? My interview today is with Michael Shahan. Michael is a marriage and family therapist who practices in Kansas City, Missouri. He is passionate about helping people get unstuck and become the best version of themselves. He specializes in trauma work and uses the Enneagram with all of his clients. Michael is also an Enneagram Type 9. If you follow him on Instagram at michaelshahan_therapy, you know he also has a knack for pegging each type with his Enneagram memes, as well as speaking directly to the pain points of each Enneagram type and offering ideas for growth and development. We actually begin our interview by talking about the funny Enneagram memes and how they can be a door into the world of self-discovery for many people. We all love a good Enneagram meme, don't we? They point things out about ourselves and others in a safe way, and we can laugh at ourselves. And for many, these memes are a bridge to more self-awareness and growth. We start digging into the why behind our behaviors, seeking to bring more fulfillment to our lives. I'm assuming that's what brought you here to this podcast today. You want something more, don't you? Listen to this interview. Allow this conversation to be a catalyst for deeper self-awareness and encouragement for you to engage more fully in your life every day. I'm excited that you're here because, I follow your work on Instagram, and I think it's really cool to see nines out there doing what you're doing kind of like putting your voice out there, but also you have this therapy background. You're a therapist. And so where do you live? You live in Kansas City, Missouri?
Yes, greater Kansas City area, yes.
And you have your license in marriage and family therapy. And you're still currently practicing? Like you have clients now? Or?
Yep, absolutely.
And then tell us how you're also integrating Enneagram into that.
So I integrated Enneagram in my practice since like some of my first clients post grad school, because I heard about the Enneagram right near the end of grad school, and I've heard about it enough to like want to apply it. And to me, it just made sense. Like therapy is sort of working on understanding why we do what we do and shifting our patterns into things that are more helpful, right? And just kind of making I like the phrase, making the covert overt in our lives and our systems, like calling those things to the surface. And like, that's exactly what the Enneagram does. And so to me, it just seemed like a perfect fit. It seemed perfect, just dovetailed right into what I already do. And it gave me, as a 9, gave me language to challenge clients that wasn't my own. So like,
yeah,
like, oh, well, the Enneagram says that you might be operating out of fear on that. Like, well, I didn't say that. Don't be mad at me. The Enneagram says it. So it was almost this way to like soften some of the stuff for my conflict avoidantness. And so it just fit, and I just learned more and more, and I spent thousands of hours talking with clients that I was able to say like, hey, I listened to this podcast and you said this is your number. Is this true for you? Like, really helped me step in their shoes even more than I already do as a 9, and gave me language to stay curious. And I think it really like shows clients that I care about them. Like, hey, I was listening to this podcast and I thought of you. Like, is this true? Like, just even them being able to experience that and my curiosity in that way, I think in itself was really helpful. And then, I don't know, the more I learned, the more stuff clicked, the more I was able to sort of understand couples and their own inner workings when you have pairings together. And I don't know, I've loved it. And it's just grown and grown. And then, so I started my own Instagram for just therapy trauma stuff. And I didn't do anything Enneagram related for about a year. I didn't think I like was good enough or deserved to do that. And I started doing it, and especially the memes just started exploding. It's like, apparently people like this, which is weird. I didn't expect that to happen, which is again, very 9-ish of me.
Yeah. It's so funny. What I love about the memes, and is also the thing that like gets people stuck in the memes, is that they're like, oh, that's funny. Or like it kind of identifies them with, yeah, I do that. And that's funny. But they don't necessarily get past it. Sometimes they just kind of get stuck in the funniness of it. I also think of that with, it's almost like in the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years with just TV and like The Office. You know how The Office, when they're filming a scene, it's like in real time. They're like, they've got the camera, they're moving, and they're showing the nuances of everyone's personality.
Oh, sure.
It's like we've become more and more interested in the way people do things, or the, highlighting the funny things about someone's personality or whatever. So I think memes also connect us to that.
Yeah. They let us sort of joke and laugh about really hard things about ourselves. Like, it's like the entryway is this like funniness, and then you're laughing at this thing. You're like, whoa, like, but also you have this deep awareness of some of your patterns that it might have been too difficult to see on its own, just directly said to you.
Yeah.
So it's able to kind of ease into some self-awareness that can be really difficult at times, I think, with that humor that can create some compassion for ourselves, I think.
Right. In your practice, do you have a lot of 9s come to you?
Not any more than other numbers, I think. But what's interesting is fellow 9s can be either my favorite clients or my least favorite clients, because it's like, I know exactly what we're struggling with, and I don't even know how to handle that. And so I can find myself shutting down at times with like 1 or 2 nines that I've had before who are so disconnected from themselves that it was so, I don't know, triggering, so spot on. Like I would start to like shut down too. Is wild. Or like I had just depths of I don't know. It's been very polarized, my own reaction to other nines, interestingly enough.
Yeah. It's hard for nines because they're often just so numbed out and so asleep to what's happening, and that self-awareness cannot be there, or we turn it
that
off.
indolence, that kind of that like almost like mental laziness, like is it worth that effort for when it's related to me? And so like other people, I'll do all the stuff for other people, but like it seems really hard to like really focus on myself, and that's going to inconvenience my wife when I have to leave for therapy, or my pocketbook. Like I don't want to do that. It just seems too hard. I think I'm okay. Things will be okay, and we can go right back into that. Like everything's going to be okay, which long term it's not. I think that's what we can use the healthy side of 6 to like, let's look at things that aren't going to be okay if I keep doing this. Sort of use that 6 line to let us do something different, to actually like think of what could go wrong and what we need to do about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so question about you as a therapist. What makes you passionate about the work that you do?
What makes me passionate? Oof.
Or why is it something you continue or you want to do?
I get to share with people experientially and let them experience that they are loved and understood no matter what. I think to like somebody to share something with me, like I've never told anybody that before, I can't believe this, and they just fully expecting me to leave or shame them or whatever. And I'm just like, I get it. No wonder you do that. Of course you do that. Like, why would you not? Like,
Yeah.
Okay. And I think like giving that love and acceptance, like unconditional love to people, is my favorite thing to do in the entire world. Because I think for us to love ourselves, we have to know what it's like to be loved. We're sort of, we tend to treat ourselves the same way we were treated growing up. And sometimes if we treat it poorly, we don't really have the capacity to love ourselves and have compassion for ourselves. And so I think that's why one of my favorite things to do, give people that experience so that they can start doing it on their own. And when I see people start doing it on their own, it is just the most exciting thing in the world. Like, you just did that. You just did this and took care. You just had compassion for yourself. Did you hear that? And I get so excited. I get so excited because it's like my favorite thing ever to see people sort of wake up to loving themselves, to seeing their own value and their own worth. And because I think nothing but good comes from that.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. When I was in high school, I guess I've always been one of these people that wanted to know the why behind a behavior. Like, where is this coming from? Or I've always looked for a reason as to why I was doing something. So, I'm doing this because I'm the youngest child in my family, or I'm doing this because XYZ. Like, that's just the way my brain is kind of structured to look for a reason in my life. And I think that's why the Enneagram has been huge for me, because it's like, like I've always, like I literally do have ADHD and I have anxiety. That's just part of my story. And those are also things that I put my kind of a box that I put myself in. Like, I'm like this because of this. I'm like this because I'm the youngest child. And the Enneagram can also be a box. But my point is, like, I'm just always looking for a structure to say, this is how I know myself.
Yeah. I did that too growing up. Like, I remember, just thinking those thoughts about why I did what I did. And I remember the first time I ever thought about, like, I had a friend who was telling her story. Her and her sister, their parents got divorced when they were younger. And one of the sisters sort of backed away from everybody and didn't want to have relationships with anybody anymore. One of them went way into relationships and got into unhealthy relationships just for the sake of being in a relationship. And I remember thinking, like, what makes that different? Like, why one sister does this and one sister does this? That just fascinated me to no end. Like, what is it about them that caused them to defend themselves in very different ways from the same thing happening? And that's just, I don't know, questions like that are just so fascinating to me. I am obsessed with learning people's stories and why they do what they do, and what drives them. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, Michael, one of the reasons I asked you specifically here I want the listeners to, I guess, get like a bird's eye view or have an understanding of. So we know the Enneagram, we're learning about our patterns and the roles and kind of the ways that we show up in the world. How would you educate someone on how they got to where they were? Like, how is it that a person's personality comes to be what it is?
Our personality tends to be patterns of thinking and feeling and doing that have turned on autopilot for us. Like they have met needs for us well growing up. And so they kind of threw out other ways to cope and stuck firmly with this. And it's become a deeply rooted pattern. Like you walk into a room, you're like, why was I here again? You're so on autopilot. Like the same thing with a personality. Like something happens and I'm going to immediately react, and it gets drilled more and more and more in me the more I do it. But I think as we're growing up, we tend to try out different ways of handling things, right? And what tends to work for us tends to stick. And I think we're sort of born our Enneagram number. And so because of that, we're kind of uniquely wounded by specific things that other numbers wouldn't. And we kind of learn to cope with it in similar ways. Does that make sense? Like my twin brother copes with things very differently than I do, even though we experienced the same childhood. Like things that bothered me about our childhood didn't seem to bother him. When there was a lot of anger in my household, I tended to shy away and want to escape and shut down and say, okay, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. My twin brothers, Nate, tended to buck up and challenge. And he sort of learned just, I don't know, because of his temperament, because of his fears and motivations and the nuanced way that he learned and picked up on things and handled things, that sort of became more ingrained in him. And it's interesting seeing things in my kids, like watching them grow up, try out a coping mechanism, like, oh, that didn't work. Let me try another one. Because when we're adults, we tend to have a handful that we just go to over and over and over again. Because they work, even if they are hurting us. That's probably why people end up in therapy. It's like, what I've always done doesn't work anymore. What do I do? So I think it tends to be this autopilot that we just sort of learned that sort of uniquely felt like it fixed or protected us from the things that were wounding us growing up. No matter how imperfect or perfect our parents were. There's no such thing as raising your kids without wounding them. No such thing. That was a very comforting thing for me actually to realize.
Yeah, as a parent, for sure, too.
As a parent, oh man, yes. And it's like some compassion, and that leads to compassion for my own parents. Like I can hold all these things, this anger and frustration for doing all these things, but like it's okay to be angry at them. That's an important emotion for me to feel like, so I don't like abandon myself, but also like nothing they could have done could have been perfect and not wounded me.
So you think, going back to that, what you said about we're born kind of with that.
Mm-hmm. More of a sensitivity. I call it, like in my class that I teach, I call it a sensitivity to certain wounds because there's like a connection. Some people teach this idea called the holy idea. Mm-hmm. And I like looking at it as almost, the whole idea means it gets very woohoo languagey at times. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of beauty to it. Like it's how in our humanness, we can't experience reality like God does. Mm-hmm. And so we can experience a little sliver of it. So we're born experiencing that. And then when we lose contact with that, we try to get it back. And that's where our personality comes from. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
So for nines, this idea of holy love, meaning everything is beautiful and wonderful and everybody, like this very love-based.
Like connected to God, type of like connected to the love of God.
Yes. And some, maybe another number maybe is more connected to the wisdom of God, or this is very simplified, or the compassion of God and these things. And so we're connected to that. And then when we start to grow up and experience pain and wounds, we sort of get detached from that and we kind of freak out because we don't have that anymore. We want to get back to it. And so our coping mechanisms look like trying to force these things back in, but that never really works long term, unfortunately. There's an idea called object relations theory. Mm-hmm. Like sort of when kids are born, babies are born, they don't see themselves as separate from their parents. Like it's I am my mom. And so when I'm separated, there's lots of distress that I feel because like I've lost part of myself. That's why kids are bad at sharing because like this toy is me. Like we're connected to things and don't see it separateness. But as we grow up, there's more separateness that's created. And when that separateness is created, we feel a loss of this connection. We're almost like Paradise Lost, like Adam and Eve kind of story. Like there's this paradise and we all feel it. We're all longing for something that's not there, but we can't quite name it. And we're trying to find it. And I think that's different for each Enneagram number. And we try to achieve finding that in a different way. And usually ends up, we don't get to take part in it for nines. This holy love we give to everybody else. Everybody else matters and everybody else makes sense, and then compassion for everybody, but not me. I don't get to sort of be involved in that wholeness that everybody else is. And that's why like that fear of loss and disconnection, that makes perfect sense. Because like kind of living it when we're unhealthy and we don't like it and we want to get out of it, and we get out in our attempt to get out of it. That's the thing with personality patterns, like our attempt to force it. Like we want holy love and we want to get along and we want to belong and not be separated, and so we like cut down parts of ourselves so we risk disconnection less, but in doing so we are disconnecting from ourselves. It's tragic. Like in our attempt to get to where we want to be, we lose it.
Exactly. I do find that also very fascinating and frustrating, because it's like once you can kind of see that about yourself, that we're going about getting our needs met in completely the wrong way. It's like if we just went, instead of going this long way, if we just went this little shortcut, it's like just go this way, and you're going to start digging into that well of love or whatever you need so much faster.
And it's crazy because I think getting there can feel counterproductive to a personality. It can feel like giving up. Feel like not trying, because it's a lot of letting go of control and finding that love is already there. It's not, you don't have to, I don't know, in my opinion, that's what it looks like. It's already there in us. And so it's more of a stopping and running rather than running better or running in a different way. It's more stop running. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Stop trying so hard.
Yes. Because
like work smarter, not harder.
Kind of. Yeah. And even like for me, it shows up in this wanting to let go of control and like be at ease in life. And it's like, I'm not letting go of control good enough. How do I make myself let go of control? It's like that's coming from a place of trying to control it. And it's so hard to stay there, I think.
We talked about the why behind the motivations, the why behind the action. So I think it's really important for a person to understand, when we're talking about childhood patterns, family of origin, the system that we were kind of born into. Can you talk a little bit about how that system how important that system is in a person's life and how it kind of carries through?
Yes. So I like to say it like growing up, we learn to play a role in our family system. Like our family system is functioning, and we sort of learn to play a role that fits with all the other roles as this perfect little cog in this machine, even if we hate it. And so when we leave our family system and move on and grow up or get married or create our own family system, even if we've hated how the role we play, we find ourselves connecting to people and finding people that play the roles that let us fit in. Like even the things that if we hated how our parents were, we're going to find somebody who treated us that way because that's comfortable. I know what to do there. And so I think that's some of the hardest work ever is to this phrase that you understand, but some of the listeners might not, homeostasis, this kind of the system wanting to go back to normal. So if you try to change something in your family system and behave differently, everybody else is going to unconsciously react in ways to kind of push you back to where you kind of belong. Like, no, you're not allowed to do that. You never do that. So we're going to, whether they know they're doing that or not, a lot of times it's unconscious. And so we grow up and we keep these same roles and we find ourselves playing the same roles, even if we're like re-traumatizing ourselves, because that's what we know and that's what's comfortable. And we don't believe we deserve anything different. We believe that we are those patterns, and we almost can't even conceive of anything different.
Right. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. And I think that idea used to really upset me. It just seemed very unfair. And it's like, I got a bone to pick with God or whatever, or how people were made, because this seems very unfair that we tend to just get back in these same things to wound us. But I heard somebody say, like, there's this sort of unconscious attempt to heal our wounds by re-experiencing them and experiencing them in a new way. Like, I'm going to be with somebody who treats me the same way, and now I'm going to defend myself in a way that I couldn't growing up because I was a kid. And I can sort of heal these wounds by finding somebody who provides this. Does that make sense? And I kind of like that. To me, that's kind of hopeful. Like, we're attempting to heal ourselves and heal these wounds by finding somebody who's similar and like doing it differently and doing it in a safe way that might not have been safe growing up.
Right.
I don't know.
I think I do hear some hope in that too, because when you think about generation after generation, like if people are very much ingrained in their way of living and it's carrying on from generation to generation. And they're actually like seeking out more trauma for themselves, essentially.
Yes. Yep.
The opportunity for like great healing if they can learn to push through
And then
that.
it changes things. That's one of the things I'm most passionate about in my work. Like in the Old Testament, God's talking to, I think, like on the Mount Sinai, I think. He says something like, this is a verse that I think is a lot of times taken out. It says like God will punish generations, 1,000 generations, but he'll reward. And to me, that maybe they're just describing like God knows how we work. If he created us, he knows how we work. And he knows that if we don't take care of these things, they're going to continue wounding people in our like further and further along our line. And so to know the importance of, if I can shift this and heal this, then I won't have to rewound my kids. And so my kids have a completely different experience. And to me, that is one of the most hopeful things that sits with me as a therapist, that like, I'm not just doing healing work with this person. I'm just changing their patterns, like changing their kids and their kids' kids and their kids' kids' and their opportunity for where they're at in life, which is really, really cool for me.
Yeah. That's like super, like, talk about, I don't know, like a passion. Like that's like that's something to drive you forward, is
it really
being a part of that work.
Yes. Even if work seems really small, it's like, it's spider webs in the future in ways that I'll never see. And that's really encouraging to me. Like I'm able to help people in that way.
So if the type 9 comes out of their family of origin and they have this message, like I've heard of the social role that 9s play, like the nobody special. Like I'm just nobody special.
I'm nobody special. I don't matter that much anyways.
And so then they start going into other relationships with this message.
Yes, 100%.
And they start seeing it show up in that as well.
They'll see it show up even if it's not showing up, but it eventually will show up, probably. They tend to find people who treat them that way, unfortunately.
Yes. And so that wound has been put there through their childhood, and then they just repeat that pattern over and over and over. Like, how do they even enter into the world of trying to change those patterns for themselves?
Such a good question. So are you asking like not even how do they practically do it, but how do they even see that as important enough to start doing when they come from that place that I'm not special? Is that,
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying is some people don't even care. Like they're like, yeah, I'm lazy, or I'm a couch potato and these memes are funny. This Enneagram thing is funny, and they're pegging me. But they just don't care. They don't want to go any further. They're like, I'm totally great.
And I think that's such a great, I think if they don't want to go, then I'm not going to make them go. I can't. I literally can't. I think until we realize that the patterns we're doing are no longer working for us, we won't change them. We can't change them permanently. We can't change them well and have the courage that it takes to continue stepping forward. Does that make sense? Like unless we see, oh man, like I am actually hurting people by withdrawing from them. Hurting myself. I'm not showing up in ways that like God made me to these amazing gifts and nobody gets them. Nobody gets to receive them. Or like in my attempt to keep the peace and be okay, like I feel awful most of the time. Like it sort of goes into this, like the train just gets derailed and like, it just doesn't work anymore. Like we sort of, change happens when, I forgot who said this, but when the pain of staying the same becomes worse than the pain of change.
Yes.
So it's like, I can change. I feel these flickers of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't like this. Maybe I can be different. But then the 9 comes back and it's like, no, you're fine. Like, okay. But like, because the idea of changing and doing something different is so scary. But it's not until the idea of staying the same becomes scarier than changing that I think people really have the motivation to step out. And I think for me, it shifted in grad school when I was with 20 other people who were all therapists, and I've never felt more cared about and given more space to be me in my entire life. Like I share these really hard things, and I remember like I cried in front of these people about this part of my story, and I never really shared with anybody. And then I had this mental, I was like, oh well, here it goes. They're going to be annoyed. It's going to be too much. I'm going to start. And this lady said, "Thank you for honoring with me that and sharing that with me." And I was like, huh?
Yes.
And just being accepted and loved and appreciated. And I think that more than almost anything changed.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to start seeing, I think that was probably related to like how much God cared about me. And then how I don't have to earn my worth and all these things. And I was able to I had some hidden addictions that I'd had for years, not told anybody about, that I was just numbing out with. And I was able to like even see, like, I don't know if I want that. Like, I want to be connected to people. And this is not connected to people when I'm hiding everything from them and not showing up in this desire to connect people. Because I was able to experience it, to be loved and connected to and appreciated. And that created this like woke me up to how much I wanted that everywhere.
Yes.
I had successfully convinced myself that I didn't need that, or I didn't want that, or I didn't deserve it or something.
Wow, that's so good. So essentially what you're saying is, so pain can lead somebody to be like, something's got to give here. This isn't, I'm hitting up against.
Yes. It's no longer working for me. It's making everything worse. Yes. Yes.
Or you just
love.
Shared an example of love.
Right. Great pain or great suffering. Great suffering or great love. Are you about to quote Richard Rohr?
No, I'm just like acknowledging what you're saying.
Pulling that out of what I was saying. And that's one of my favorite things that he says is the thing that changes the thing that changes us the most is great love and great suffering. Those are the only things that can really break down our ego patterns and show us that we want something else or that we deserve something else.
Wow.
And I love that so much.
Amazing. That is so amazing. I was, are you familiar with Celebrate Recovery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
So I went into a Celebrate Recovery in about 10 or 15 years ago, and started doing the Celebrate Recovery at my church to help. Like that, it was, I want to help people. That's what brought me to the table of like, I want to help. I knew I was having anxiety in my life and struggling, but I wasn't cognizant enough or like awake enough to that to say, oh, I have anxiety and I want to go get help for that. But
sure.
But what led me to getting there was that I desire to help others. And through that, it helped me. Like, obviously, like I went to help others and it helped me. And just all this fear and being able to share my story and that shared experience of saying, this is who I am. This is my story. These are my wounds. But what reminded me of that is I got up to share, part of my story to everyone that was there. And it felt really good to do that. But when I was going back to my chair, the lady that was kind of like my sponsor, she was like, Lindsay, that was so good. Like, you are worth this. Like, you're worth doing this work. And I was just like it just, I mean, how basic
against the message you had been sort of telling yourself.
Exactly. So and how basic of a thing to say, how like, but for her to say, you're worth this, like, keep going here. Oh my gosh. Like, yes. And so, you mentioned this kind of this idea of the pain that can take us into getting better, or the love.
Or as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of tasting something that's good there that we're like, oh, where'd that come from? Where is that? That feels very hidden and buried.
Past your defenses, that you never really let it in. That hit something that was buried, that you sort of closed off because you didn't think you could get it anymore or something, but something sneaks its way in there and touches you in that way. Like, whoa. Right. Like, one quick example, like my wife, when all this stuff started happening with her cancer and stuff, there's great pain there, great suffering, and so much love from people. Like, I have never, man, this is really fresh. I've never felt so loved and cared for. It's like people every day, like, what do you need? Can I help you? What do you need? I was like, why? Was my first reaction, like, why are these people, like, I had no idea this many people would be more than willing to give so much of themselves. And like, I've almost had to take them up on that in ways that I haven't before, because my life is not together right now with all this stuff happening, and we've needed more help than before. And able to like receive that love has been so healing. It's come right alongside with, at the same time, the suffering. And it's been fascinating to see, like breaking down those ego parts of me with the suffering, and knowing that I can't keep playing the personality games that I've been playing before. Like, I don't have the energy for that anymore. I'm just kind of like forced to receive. Like, when I first called a friend when I first found out about everything with my wife, the first thing he said was, God's got this, which we can debate theologically that for a long time. But to me, in that moment, it wasn't helpful. Like, I don't care right now. Like, that's not what I care about. And so I said to him, I think in my nyness before, I've been like, thanks, that's encouraging, appreciate it. And like, pretended that meant a lot just to soothe him. But instead I'd said, I don't need that right now. That doesn't help. Which I would have not said had I not been so broken down, and I was able to. Does that make sense? Like those
Mm-hmm.
patterns, my 9ness. I heard somebody say recently that tears, our egos dissolved by tears. Like it kind of takes away these things that we normally do to protect ourselves and to function. We just can't do them anymore, and then we learn that like, oh, I can be okay without that, and actually get better without that in ways. And it's just really interesting to see.
Yeah. What's also making me think about, and I appreciate you sharing that. I just know that it's hard to talk about, and I appreciate you sharing that. But it makes me think about what you were saying earlier of so we have these patterns of showing up in the world, and we might be seeking out others that fit right into that cycle of pattern. But love, God, is trying to kind of like shine through to get us to like surrender ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said about the tears, say that quote again.
The ego is dissolved by tears.
The ego is dissolved by tears. That's just that. I mean, that's blowing my mind a little bit, because it makes you think about a child and how a child's, childlike faith and the position that we're in as a child, so vulnerable, and we're learning about the world, and we're being wounded by the world, but also it's almost like God is able to come through in those moments of tears, in those moments of surrender, in those moments of like, you have nothing else to do right now but just receive the love from the people around you.
Wow. Yeah. And because we work so hard to not receive that.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And our ego is very structured in a way to protect, to be an adult, to be a protected human being, to be safe. And then we're going through a very like tender space. And I think I'm just kind of taken aback by the grace of God, that he would want to show you that, like in your tenderness, in your like, as much as you are helping others and you're like serving, giving, and you're just kind of taken aback by the pure love of people's generosity or reaching out to you. Or
yes, what's crazy is that like the giving, that's what I needed, was to get given to. Like I was giving to other people what I needed the whole time. And I think we all do that. Does that make sense? Again. I was giving to other people what I needed the whole time.
Yes.
Like there's a part of me that knows that I need to be loved for exactly who I am. And it's hard for me. And so I give that to other people everywhere, easily. But I think that points out to something in me that's needed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like we sort of go around giving other people what we actually need, and which we can use that as a way, like, what do I give to other people? Maybe that's what I need. And able to take a look at it in that way, I think, can be tremendously helpful. And tremendously helpful.
And as much work as you've done on yourself as a person, and as much as you know all of the theories and what we're talking about, these patterns, like just the purity of love that pierces through what you need. It just makes me think of the goodness of God when I think about that. And what I would like for our listeners to hear, maybe they're experiencing pain, that's saying like, I need to fix this. I don't know how to fix this. If they're like me, they might be also experiencing shame. Like, I've tried to fix this. I'm in this cycle of not knowing how to fix this. Or maybe they're experiencing love, or this like divine thing we're talking about that pierces through, like, hello, I see you. I love you. It makes me think of, from the wisdom of the Enneagram, the essence that's in us.
Yeah. Yes.
What do they mean when they say like your essence is still there?
Yeah. That idea that we are all created in the image of God. Like underneath our personality, underneath all of our ways that we've tried to make things right. Our egos need to have control and have power and have all this stuff. And underneath all that is, before, quote, like the fall in the Old Testament stories, there was like, we were made in the image of God. And there's like paradise place. And so like this essence of God, his image is in us, and nothing can change that. Nothing that we do can ever change that. And it's more of I don't know, I see it as almost like a running from that. We're our growth doesn't come from addition, it comes from subtraction. Our growth doesn't come from adding things that we don't have. It comes from taking the defensive mechanisms and the postures of defense and not accepting love that we've used so much in life. And so underneath that, if we can set that down, we will connect with the image of God already in us and the love of God that's already in us. And then we're able to give it to other people in more direct ways. I think that's how I see it, at least.
Yeah. Why do you think people don't think that's still there?
I think just their own personality patterns don't let them see it. It's hard to trust that it's there, right? It's like my ego says, I have to be in control and I have to have the answers and I have to make things black and white. Jim Finley, this guy says, to the ego that claims to be everything, if it finds out that it is nothing, that would be its undoing. Like our own ego thinks it's like we make meaning of things and this is how the world works and this is what I need to do. This is how people think of me. But that's not the full truth of everything. And it's scary to let go of that. It's probably one of the riskiest things we could do is to let go of that. And accept that there is like an unconditional love for us, especially if that was never mirrored to us growing up. It's even more difficult to do. It's hard to trust or believe. We don't have the wiring to even believe that that's the case.
Yeah, and it just feels really unsafe.
Yeah,
to let go.
Yes, feels way too risky. Feels way too risky to even to trust that something like that could be on the other side.
If there's someone listening out there and they maybe aren't experiencing pain or they don't see the pain that they have, but maybe you are experiencing like some moments of pure love, some moments of enjoyment, some moments of connection. Yeah. I would say like focus in there more, focus into those spaces. Like if they say that 9s are very easily connect to nature. Yeah, like if when you're in nature, you're connecting to something that's divine and you're like, oh, that's what I want more of. Yeah. I think that's what we're talking about here is that.
Yes. I love that you said more of, because that means I think if you connect to it, want more of it, that means you're already experiencing it in a small way. You wouldn't be interested. You wouldn't be driven to find that if it wasn't already there, in my opinion.
Yeah. And if a 9 is not necessarily, if they're not driven to get better and they're not experiencing pain that's like pushing up against them so hard, like causing them to just surrender and like, something's got to give here. Like the pain of change, what you're saying?
Yeah.
Then I think what we're saying is if you want to experience more of the divine nature we're talking about, this divine love that ultimately we've been disconnected from, then change may be exactly what is needed. Moving forward and taking the steps and realizing that you're worth it. You are worth the work of moving forward. And the more forward you move, the more you're going to experience that divine love.
That Jim Finley I mentioned earlier he says moving forward to our origin. So moving forward, but in that, finding who we were the whole time and our value that was there the whole time before we built all the scaffolding around it. So it's such a cool like paradox of moving forward and ending up where we always were.
I want this for us. I want us to keep moving forward, staying awake to ourselves and being willing to be affected by life. I know you're here because you want a better life, right? I hope you've heard loud and clear today that it's in the work of moving forward and opening ourselves up to experience life that we find ourselves and we begin to see that we have been there all along. I'm seeking that for myself every day. How can I set myself up for success in such a way that I let in all these divine moments of love? What decisions do I need to make to align my world with more connection, more fun, and more purpose? Let's keep doing this together. Make sure you're signed up for my email list, subscribe to this podcast, and if you aren't a member of the Peacemakers community on Facebook, look for the link down below in the show notes. Thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.